we configure the inverters, this process will include updating the firmware on the WCM and the firmware on the inverter. I ensure that my inverter is connected to the WCM, and I can click configure. And this process, because this inverter has already been updated with WCM firmware and the most recent inverter firmware, it passed this process very fast. If you have an inverter that needs a firmware update, this process can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. So seeing that my inverter has been configured successfully, I can then move on to my batteries. And again, we have an image that shows the process of how we can configure our batteries. So we have our inverter COM cable connected to our splitter, which is then connected to the inverter COM port on the WCM. And I need to take one of the batteries and plug it into the splitter. This process is serializing each of the batteries so that the system can identify what battery is labeled what. I'm now going to take battery 1, and I've previously labeled these BMS cables. So battery 1 is the only thing that is connected, and remove it from my BMS port, plug it into the splitter, and this diagram shows only one splitter being used. I have a second splitter on this install. I'm going to click that only one battery is connected, which is battery 1, and it shows that it's configured successfully. So I can now go to the next step where I remove battery 1 and plug in battery 2. So I'm now going to remove battery 1 and plug in battery 2. I can check that only battery 2 is connected to the splitter and click configure. And I can now move on to the next step. For this step, it shows the utilization of that second splitter where battery 2 and battery 1 are connected. And what we're doing is a systems check to ensure that both batteries are accounted for. So I'm going to click to confirm that all battery COM cables are connected to the parent inverter WCM, and then click battery systems check, and it confirms that both batteries are accounted for. I can then click next, and it's going to indicate to me to relocate this battery splitter into the BMS port. So I can do so now by disconnecting the BMS splitter, and then relocating it into the correct BMS port. And I can confirm that that has been done, and I can move on to the next step.